As we approach the 75th anniversary of Yud Shevat, this year, Tafshin Pei, 75 years from Tafshin Yud, when there was the Hilula, Histalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Yud Shevat was Shabbos then. And of course, immediately, B'Zorach HaShemesh, U'Bo HaShemesh, the Rebbe, Der HaShvi, the Rebbe's leadership and the Siyas began. So this year, Tafshin Pei, Yud Shevat will be 75 years. So it's worthwhile to share some memories, especially from the Maamar Bosi Legani, which we know was the last Maamar that the Frierdiker Rebbe published. That Shabbos, Yud Shevat, Tafshin Yud, Chassidim, Bochrim were learning the Maamar Bosi Legani that morning when the news came, sadly, that Friday night and that morning that the Stalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Maamar became, of course, special Maamar with the Rebbe using the Maamar to become the launch of the Rebbe's inaugural Nesias the next year, Yud Shevat Tafshin Yud Aleph, when the Rebbe Chazed Bosi Legani and brought from all the Rabbeim. And then ever since, every year, Yud Shevat, the Rebbe would Chazer and review and explain a chapter corresponding. So chapter 1, of course, was in Tafshin Yud Aleph, chapter 2, Tafshin Yud Beis, Yud Shevat, chapter 3, Tafshin Yud Gimel. And so it went. I remember I was just by mitzvah, when the Rebbe finished, it was 20 chapters, Bosi Legani has 20 chapters. So Tafshin Lamed was the 20th chapter. No one knew what would happen in Tafshin Lamed Aleph. So the Rebbe started again. He started explaining from chapter Aleph again, Lamed Aleph, and Lamed Beis was chapter 2. So basically we have a second series of Maamarim. So essentially, the Maamar Bosi Legani, Frierdiker Rebbe's Maamar of 20 chapters, we have the first time that went from Tafshin Yud Aleph till Tafshin Lamed, and the second time from Tafshin Lamed Aleph till the Rebbe actually stopped saying Maamarim already. The last Maamar Bosi Legani was Tafshin Mem Ches, I believe. So we didn't really finish the whole 20 years. So what I'd like to share is some memories from the corresponding chapter this year, is Perek Tezvov. We're in Tafshin Pei. So 40 years ago was Tafshin Memhei, where the Rebbe for the second time explained the Maamar Bosi Legani, chapter 15. And the first time was Tafshin Chofhei, 20 years before that. So Tafshin Memhei, I remember very vividly as we speak. I remember standing by the Fabrengen. The Fabrengen that year, Yud Shevat, was Friday. So, interestingly, in the earlier years, often when Yud Shevat was Friday, the Rebbe sometimes said a Maamar Friday night, and Shabbos, and sometimes also Motzei Shabbos was a Fabrengen. But then in Tafshin Memhei, it wasn't that way any longer, so the Rebbe only Fabrengen on Shabbos Pashas B'Shalach, Yud Aleph Shvat, meaning the day after Yud Shevat, and of course said the Maamar Bosi Legani, as the Rebbe's Kerogil, the way the Rebbe would do it, he would first sum up all the parakim till the chapter of that year, and then the main depth on the discussion was around the teichen of chapter Perek Tezvov. What was also very interesting for us, I was also a chayzer and a maniach, as you may know, was not just the chazar of that Maamar, but also comparing it to how the Maamar was said in Tafshin Chofei. You know, how the Rebbe, what did he say in Tafshin Chofei that he didn't say in Tafshin Memhei, and why would the Rebbe change the different styles? So we'll talk a little about that. But just first a little arum, some of the backgrounds. As I said, it was Shabbos, Pasha B'Shalach. Of course, the whole teichen of the Fabrengen was connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Rebbe, this is Lemochras Yud Shevat. And the Hira is connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe, and this Fabrengen in general, spoke a lot about the Frierdiker Rebbe's name, Yosef and Yitzchok. Yosef Hashem li ben Acher, that the Avodah of the Frierdiker Rebbe was to transform the Ben from Acher to Ben, and Yitzchok, everything should be done b'simcha. Because sometimes you can think when you're transforming the Cheshach to Eir, Acher to Ben, you could say, you know what, it's a difficult Avodah. So Yitzchok adds that it has to be done b'simcha. This was a big part of the theme, and there are different topics that Rebbe spoke about, a lot about Avos Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael. And Kerogel, the Rebbe went through, as he would do on a Shabbos, spoke a Rashi, a Zohar, the Kut Levi Yitzchok, and the Zohar, the Rambam, and other topics related. But regarding the Maamar itself, Bosi Legani, what was unique in a few ways was, besides the fact that the Rebbe, of course, added the whole Havana. So just to sum up, what is the Teichen of chapter 15 in Bosi Legani, in the original Bosi Legani from the Frierdiker Rebbe, is that starting from chapters a bit earlier, already chapter 11 and on, so the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking there about Sivus Hashem, that the Sivus Hashem are the Yidden, that are the army of Hashem, and they fight the battle of what? The Meik Nadir B'Tachtenim, which of course is the central theme of Bosi Legani. And the Frierdiker Rebbe speaks about Siva, the Anshe Tzova are the soldiers, the foot soldiers, that are Meiser Nefesh and march up front. So even though they can call them the simple soldiers, but the Eibishter, in this case like the Melech, is Mevazbez Kola Eitzes. That's the expression in the Maamar. He splurges all the treasures that were hidden over all the years that the king never revealed to anyone, but when it comes to Midas HaNetzachin, to win a battle against an enemy, that's when the Melech reveals the deepest secrets and the deepest resources that he gives to the Anshe Tzova. So what is the secrets? What are these secrets? So that Frierdiker Rebbe explains in the Maamar, he brings from the Tikkun Ezeiah, the Eid Ein Sof is Lamai Adein Ketz, or Lamata Mata Adein Tachlis. So first in chapters 11, 12, and 13 and 14, he explains Lamata Mata Adein Tachlis, which is the idea that Eid Ein Sof goes down level by level by level, Lamata Mata, not just in the higher elements, all the way down to Elam Hazeh Agashmi V'Achumri. Then comes Lamai Lamala Aden Ketz, and that's what chapter 15 begins to discuss. What's Lamai Lamala Aden Ketz? The exact opposite. Helam Achad Helam. That just like Elikus can reveal himself to lower levels and lower levels, also the Elikus has concealments deeper than concealment after concealment, which is also Adein Sof. Which this is ultimately the Eitzer Elyon. These are the secret treasures that the Melech ultimately reveals and gives to the Anshe Tzova, to the soldiers. So in this Perek, Pezvov, the focus is on what means Lamai Lamai Aden Ketz, what means Helam Achar Helam. So in Tov Shech Hey, the Rebbe explains, like he usually did, every section of the chapter. In the second so-called Tafshil Lamed Aleph, when the Rebbe started explaining Bosi Legani a second time, we noticed there was one general difference, was the Rebbe would focus more on one central theme of the Perek. In other words, in the first 20 years, the Rebbe spoke more and explained almost like, I don't want to say like Pirush Rashi, but he took every section of the Perek and explained what it meant. In Tafshil Lamed Aleph and on, generally speaking, the Rebbe usually took the central theme. So in Tavshim Mem Hey, what was the central theme? Helam Achad Helam. That the higher you go, there's more halamis and more halamis, more tzimtzumim, more tzimtzumim. So what was unique about this Maamar? Probably of all the Maamarim of the Rebbe, this is the most unique part of it, is that the Rebbe spoke about in Yonim that usually Chassidus doesn't talk about. And the Rebbe said that. He said that Bechlal, you find very rare that Chassidus talks about the tzimtzumim before the tzimtzum arishin. So if you want a headline, that would be the main thing, the tzimtzumim before the tzimtzum arishin. What does that mean? We usually know that Eitz Chaim, famous Eitz Chaim, it's brought hundreds of times in Chassidus, that Izal says that before anything happened, Eid Ein Sof Hayim Amala Kol HaMetzias, it was only Eid Ein Sof. And then the Eibishter Tzamtzum Satzmei, which means that Tzimtzum Esa'er, and created a Mokim Cholol Mokim Ponei, a space. As the Alter Rebbe explains, think of a teacher who creates space for the student. Now you have a Cholol Mokim Ponei, and then in that Cholol, his Mamshech HaKav Chut, a laser beam of energy to create existence. That's usually when we talk about Tzimtzum. That's the first Tzimtzum. It's called Tzimtzum Arishin. After that, there are many Tzimtzumim, of course, every world, from Ak to Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim, Atzilas, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah. Here, the Rebbe went, Mitzad Lamai Lamai Aden Ketz, you have to say that there's also Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin. Because we know that before the Tzimtzum Arishin, there's many Dargis in Eid Ein Sof. Not actual Dargis, there's actually a letter from the Rebbe in Tavshin Tes. He explains there's no real levels before the Tzimtzum, but conceptually there are levels. So the fact that it goes from Atzmos to Yecheles Atzmos, and from Yecheles Atzmos to actually a Moyer, and from Moyer to Eir HaKol Batzmuse, and then in Eir itself, many Dargis, all the way to Aleis HaRotzen, all before the Tzimtzum, means there are Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin. And the Rebbe again emphasized that this is a Chiddush of Chassidus that you don't find very often that it's spoken. So that was the central theme of the Maamar. Just to give a little more background, so the Rebbe said the Maamar was a really, I remember the Spilus was unbelievable. When we heard the Maamar, it was on Shabbos, and then by Chazara that night, because it was literally like things that you don't usually hear. You're not going to find many Maamar Chassidus that talk about this. I'll go into that a little more in a moment. Okay, so the Chazara was very exciting. I remember when we wrote the Maamar up, I was working with Rabbi Yael and some of the other Chazim, and there was a lot of points that were not so clear, because again, since you didn't have many Maimorim on the topic, there was nowhere really to look. So we wrote up a few questions to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered them actually in the next Fabrengen. The next Fabrengen was Shabbos Parshas Yisrei, Yud Shevat. And the Rebbe answered, so often the Rebbe would sometimes answer in B'ksav. Here the Rebbe answered, there's a whole sikh in Shabbos Parshas Yisrei, the end of the Fabrengen. The Rebbe said, some questions were asked to me, and the Rebbe goes into whole arichis, which the anochos, of course, exist of these Fabrengens. But an interesting thing is that Rebbe one more time spoke about it. 2 weeks later, Yisrei, Mishpotim Trumat, 3 weeks later, Parshat Tetzaveh, Shabbos Parshat Tetzaveh, which again was a rare thing, that the Rebbe should continue talking about a theme that went back almost a month earlier. Shabbos Parshat Tetzaveh, the Rebbe said that I was asked more questions. These questions were actually from Ha'aras Hatmimim in Morristown. I think it was Melech Tzvibel, the Mashpia there, Olav Hashalom, that wrote the questions. And the Rebbe went further and continued to explain it. So if you really want to get the whole sugya of Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin, there's the Maamar Bosi Legani, Tavshin Memhei, of course, Shabbos Parshat Yisrei, and then Shabbos Parshat Tetzaveh. So it was a real koch. What was unique also, you have to keep in mind, that in those years, the Rebbe didn't usually speak at length Haskalah and Chassidus. The Haskalah and Chassidus you saw more in the earlier years. Not that the Rebbe never spoke about it. Of course, there were many Fabrengens, and many times the Rebbe spoke, not always befedish, but the language of Tzimtzum and Tzimtzumim Lifnei Tzimtzum Arishin, and the language of Yecheles, Atzmus, and Moyer, and Oyer, was the Rebbe was like really quite rare for Tavshim Memhei to hear these Asias. So it was a very, added a lot of chayas and a lot of islavos, because when you hear the Rebbe speak that way, in the way it's lost with like a mayanim is gaber in Chassidus, it was quite powerful. And again, it was in yonim that you don't usually hear about. So and most of it is not mugeh. I think later one of the Mugudik Maimorim, it seichens some of these. There's a summary of the Nekudis in Ha'ara. I don't remember which Maimar it is, one of the Mugudik Maimorim. Maybe it'll come to me. But regardless, most of the sichas here, the Rebbe was not Magia. I think I gave in one of the sichas, I think Yisrei, for the Rebbe to Magia, but he didn't end up being edited. Such fundamental points you'd like to have the Rebbe's Hagah, but Lo Zachinu. So I want to talk about it a bit more, but first I wanted to give the background. Now another interesting thing is that the Rebbe continued the theme as well in the two Maimorim that came afterwards. Tu B'Shvat was Arba Rosh Hashanim Haim the Maimar, and the Rebbe continued speaking about Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin, a Hemshech to Bosi Legani. And then again, Vayishma Yisrei, Shabbos Parshat Yisrei, besides the Sikha I mentioned, in the Maimar the Rebbe also spoke. So you have a pretty big picture here with a lot of with Hemshech Advarim. Interesting, just to point out as well, interesting thing then was also Shabbos Parshat Yisrei, the Rebbe started the Fabrengen, that this is a Chazakah, this is the third Fabrengen coming from the Hilula of Yud Shevat. The Fabrengen, of course, Shabbos Parshat B'Shalach was L'mochras, was the day after Yud Shevat, Tu B'Shvat, Chomish Osa B'Shvat, I should say, and the third is Parshat Yisrei. And the Rebbe asked an interesting question, Shabbos Parshat Yisrei. He says, what's the Negeya that's a Chazakah? Mashiach is about to come, and we're going to have all the Rabbeim with us. So why is it so important to know there's a Chazakah of 3 Fabrengens after Yud Shevat? And the Rebbe answered that even after Mashiach comes, we're still going to need Avedus Hashem. So even if the Rabbeim are with us, we're still going to need Avedus. So the Chazakah, Tosa Zima have a Chazakah, only as Chizuk in the Aveda of the Balei Lula. Interesting Nekuda that the Rebbe spoke about in Shabbos Parshat Yisrei. So let me give a little more. I guess the room about the sugya. So first of all, the tzimtzum kedem tzimtzum arishin. Just for the record, we did know there's a concept like that because there's an interesting ha'ara in Tofresh Nun Tes, famous Hecholzu Ranat. So the famous Hecholzu, we know that Rebbe actually published it in a kuntris with his ha'aras. So somewhere in the middle there, you're going to see there's a long ha'ara from the Rebbe where he talks about the tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin. That he says in the Kabbalah of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug, namely in Emek HaMelech, he talks about a tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin. He calls it meruba v'loy igul. That's what the Rebbe writes in the ha'ara. And he also zeichens to the sefer from Rab Aaron Strasheller. So there's a sefer from Rab Aaron Strasheller, Aaron Halevi, which is called I forgot the name of the sefer right now. It's one of his Maimarim, Sfarim, where he also talks about the tzimtzumim before the tzimtzum arishin. So when the Rebbe says it's rare in Chassidus, it seems to be he's referring to those places. He also tzeichens a maimer Eisa Sukkasa Tofresh Ayin Dalet and Hemshech Ayin Beis, where he also talks about it. And there's also a tziyun. You'll see the tziyun to Teira Shalom from the Rebbe Rashab, where he also refers to tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin. Now it's interesting because the Rebbe did speak about, especially Shabbos Parsha Tetzaveh, the Igul and Merubah, which I don't want to go into the whole in-depth discussion. You can look it up in the Sichos themselves. But I will say this. When the Rebbe speaks about an inyan, it's not just he's talking about a nekuda here. There's something about Lamai Aden Ketz from Perek Tezvav and Bosi Legani that we need to know, that it's important to understand these tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin. So I'll quote something that the Rebbe, when he speaks about, he said that the first questions that were asked to the Rebbe, that we asked the Rebbe, were that what does it mean there was a tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin? The whole idea of tzimtzum is only shayich to oir that is mamala mokam achol. Chassidus says higher levels of oir leinoga b'hem tzimtzum. So the tzimtzum doesn't affect the oir that is not subject to tzimtzum. A tzimtzum, a concealment, can only conceal something that's shayich to be concealed. Like for example, in atzmus, we know there's no such thing as tzimtzum. Like think of the teacher who's teaching an inyan. Even if he's mitzamtzim and he diminishes the flow of his idea as he communicates with the student, for him, there's no tzimtzum. So what means that tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin? At what level? So the Rebbe explained that it's a dover poshet, mepsari echza lekah. You look at every person, that in order to go from a level of atzmos, even to yechelis, and definitely to moyer, requires a tremendous yerida, so to speak, because atzmos is higher than all these teirim. Even the teir yechelis, the Rebbe said, which is a very high level, and we asked from the Tzemach Tzedek talks about yechelis, it still means God's capacity. But God himself is higher than his yechelis too. So in other words, tzimtzum, the Rebbe is teaching here, is the idea that there has to be so-called a yerida from a higher level to a lower level. That was one thing. In Tetzaveh, the Rebbe answered the opposite question. If it's so poshut, this is what the Ha'aras Satmimim asked the question, if it's so poshut, why is it a chiddush from Chassidus and from the Rabbeim that there's tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin? And the Rebbe's answer was because the Eibush is not muchrach in any way. He could do whatever he wants. He could have created a whole existence without a seder shtalshlus, without without tzimtzum. The chiddush is the Eibush that chose to do it in a way that it should make sense, that we should be able to have step by step. So then the question was asked to the Rebbe, so why is it so rare in Chassidus? If it's such an important nekuda, why is it so rare? So the Rebbe said, because there's certain things that is hester elikim, that we don't go to because it's beyond us. So then the Rebbe asked the question, why sometimes do we talk about it? Like the Rebbe himself was talking about. So the Rebbe said, because I eat davis in the mitzias. Sof, that's the mitzias, that we are rooted in the highest levels. And we need to know that A'id is mushrish in atzmus mamish before all these levels. So you could say that may be the nekuda, what the Rebbe really wanted to bring out in this Hadgosha, was not just to talk about tzimtzum before the tzimtzum arishin. What he says, that A'id Avisin, that when he comes down in Tachtenim, he has the power of atzmus mamish, that's higher than all the Maila Aden Ketz, the Eitzes. He's the soldier. Every Yid is a soldier that's given the eitzes. What's the eitzes? Not the Giluyim, the Helam Achad Helam, that all these levels are given to him to be able to do his work and fight the battle of transforming Elam Hazeh into Adir B'Tachtein. So from that it came very clear, Tov Shem Hey, that the Rebbe was focusing on the central theme of our Aveda. Now this Yesh Lema B'Derech Hefsher, this I'll just say, we know later that year, Mem Hey, was of course Yud Beis Tammuz time, when the Rebbe first revealed about the Sfarim that were taken, this Pasha of Hey Tevis, which would take 2 more years till Hey Tevis was Mem Zayin. This is Mem Hey. And maybe the Rebbe was saying that, when you have to fight a real battle, it mivazbez all the eitzes, which the Rebbe did, the Mesiras Nefesh, for dealing with the whole issue with the Sfarim, was perhaps in Tavshin Mem Hey, right before the Pasha would, the story would explode, the Rebbe was Magdim Refuah Lamaka, and talking about that we have all these kreiches, Maila Maila Aden Ketz, even the Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin. This is Yesh Lema B'Derech Hefsher, this you can fabring about and ask just to make it more practical. Why then? Because the Rebbe, whenever he said a Maamar, it was not just time he said it. It was negated to be Mezachik V'Avir, negated to this Yonah Diyema. So it could be the Rebbe was preparing that, because that was a big theme in the years after Mem Hey, Mem Vov, Mem Zayin, especially Mem Zayin after Hey Tevis, which we just now coming from as well, in Hey Tevis, Yud Shevat, that the theme was essentially the Bizbuz Ha'etzes Mitzad HaNetzochen, that the deepest keiches, and it's all about the nitzchias of the nasi. That's what Hey Tevis is about. So it could be this idea that we are connected all the way to these highest levels is very much part of giving us keiches to deal with the challenges. So in that context, you could also say here we are now 40 years from Mem Hey, Pei Hey, and of course we've had now Chav Zayin Oder, and we've had Gimel Tammuz. So this is a Helam. And but when you learn this Maamar, you come to learn that the Helam is the B'Shvil Agili. It's not a Helam Stam a Helam. That the deepest levels of these Halamas go all the way up to the highest levels, because it's giving us the keiches to deal with every given situation. So perhaps, as we are now learning again Perek Tezvav, L'mayla Mayla Aden Ketz, its lessons are very relevant to us today. That even though there's a Helam, and we have not yet been zeichet to the Gula Mitzvah Vashlema B'Tei V'Nira V'Nigla in the fullest sense of the word, so we take strength and keiches not just l'mata mata aden tachlis, so l'mayla mayla aden ketz, helam achar helam, that even though it's a helam, but it goes rooted all the way in the helam ha'atzmi. And Chassidus explains, that the Rebbe explains in the Maamarim of these chapters, that the helam is not a real helam. It's only a helam l'gabei nu. We don't see. But when a father conceals himself from his child, the father sees the child. It's just the child doesn't see the father. Famous Sikh Tu B'Shvat, Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, Tov Shalom Tes, when the Rebbe was crying about how the Tata Behalzach from the Kind sucht, Sonntag gesucht, Montag gesucht, Dienstag gesucht. But the Helam is only from our point of view. And Chassidus explains our goal is to be able to see beyond the curtain, so to speak, and recognize that's not a real Helam. Because Hein Heng Vur Esav, just as Yecholte Lahayir, Yecholte Shaleh Lahayir. It's all the same Yechelis of the Ebershter. Atzmus has the power to reveal, has the power to conceal. So it's our job is to see within the concealment, we say, Atu Keil Mistater, that the Ebershter is really the power of the Hester itself is also coming from Atzmus. So we have direct Teiros for our time today to get keiches from this Perek. The Rebbe said everything the Rebbe bavordent. So here as we learn Perek Tezvav this year, for the cycle of Bosi Legani, it's a direct lesson to all of us, gives us keiches to get through this matzav and recognize that the Helam is only b'shvil agili, and it's ultimately the Helam itself, tzimtzum atzme yoyer, as the Rebbe, as Chassidus explains and the Rebbe elaborates on, that we should be zeicher finally to see, and we'll see that the very Helam itself was the deepest gilui of all, because it carries the deepest gilui of Atzmus himself, which the Neshamas Yisrael are rooted in. So we should all have, and be zeichet to all the hachanas we have to make for Yud Shevat, and we should be zeichet ready to the last words of Bosi Legani, Toshin Yud Aleph, Am niske zenzich mit Reben dolle Matem Asar Tvachim v'hu Yigalenu.